Hello there, my name's Card. I'm a long-time anarchist community organizer. Today, I wanted to talk about the YouTube channel and online persona Beau of the Fifth Column, as well as the man who runs it, the seriously bad things that man did at one stage in his life, and how, if you're a fan of his, you ought to have a right to know about those things, so that you can make an informed decision as to whether or not you would like to continue being a fan or supporter of his. If you know of, or regularly watch, Beau of the Fifth Column's videos here on YouTube, I have to request and suggest that you listen to all of what I'm about to say and give some serious thought to the implications. I'll also try to keep this as brief and as to the point as possible, but, content warning, this video will be pretty frankly discussing financial abuse and exploitation, human trafficking, and direct threats of violence. Firstly, I'll be describing what Beau did, then how he never actually did anything meaningful to make amends, then lastly, where that might leave you, a viewer of his. I'll also link all of the relevant sources at the top of the description for what I'm about to say too, if you want to check those for your own sake. Prior to his career ever making videos on YouTube, Beau, whose real name is Justin Eric King, along with 3 other men, operated a sham shell company out of Florida, which presented itself as a legitimate labor subcontracting business. This business would apply for temporary work visas on behalf of foreign nationals under the false pretense that Beau and company had a legitimate workplace and lodging lined up and ready for the incoming foreign workers, who would then be brought over to America to do seasonal work. In reality, these prospective workers, who were predominantly Eastern European women aged 19 to 23, would be immediately extorted out of thousands of dollars for phony visa processing fees, then be made to work for well below the minimum wage at a number of hotels and resorts throughout the state with which Beau had a relationship. The 4 men running this unlawful company would each pocket a substantial amount of profit from the hotels and resorts they worked with, their kickbacks being disguised as a contractor's fee. The young women Beau essentially kept in indentured servitude would be charged for transportation to and from the places they were being illegally employed, and charged to stay in condominium housing owned by the group running this operation, with reportedly up to 20 women being made to stay in each unit. Furthermore, these women were made compliant through the threat of withheld wages, the threat of terminating their visas and turning them over to immigration authorities, verbal and psychological abuse, and the threat of physical violence. The women being brought into the US had been told by Beau and his collaborators that they would be doing legitimate seasonal work. In actuality, they quickly found themselves being grossly exploited and abused. In cases of labor trafficking conspiracies like this one, sadly, the perpetrators often get away with it for far too long. However, in this case, the sheer scale at which Beau's shell company was bringing in young women attracted the attention of authorities, who investigated and busted open the whole thing. Beau and his co-conspirators were found to have fraudulently lodged the paperwork to bring in over 1,000 people. Thankfully, this operation was shut down. The state ended up arresting Beau, which then formally charged him with visa fraud and alien smuggling, after which he was sentenced to 41 months in prison. Additionally, the 3 other main people who he conspired with received similar sentences. Let's not mince words here. What Beau did is abominable. I'm no big proponent of incarceration either, although I will say I think just 41 months, just short of 3.5 years, is a curiously short sentence for something as gravely serious as tricking hundreds of foreign nationals into coming into the country illegally and becoming your indentured servants. Again, I will link the requisite sources to back this claim up at the top of the description of this video. First will be a US Department of Justice release announcing the arrest and prosecution. Second, a paper produced by Florida State University documenting human trafficking and labor rights abuses, which goes into detail about exactly what Beau and company did. It's a 276-page document, but if you do a quick Ctrl+F search for Justin King, Beau's real name, you'll find the specific segment of the document giving the pertinent details there. Now, I'm sure Beau wouldn't explicitly deny these things if he were ever asked about it. The facts of the case aren't really disputed, and they're part of the public record. I do think it's very disappointing, however, how Beau is evidently happy to downplay what he did and let almost everyone who follows him remain completely ignorant of the criminal enterprise he fronted. In researching to write the script for this video, I could find one time he has publicly alluded to his criminal conviction. Beau published in April 2019 a Q&A style video on his YouTube channel in celebration of reaching 100,000 subscribers. I'll also link this video of his in the description of my own, for the sake of transparency and posterity. In this video, he directly alludes to his crimes twice. In one instance, I believe Beau was responding to the existence of a blog which was being maintained by some unknown progressive activist at the time, which detailed essentially the same events I'm telling you about now. He brings up a question he was supposedly getting occasionally at the time, and in answering it, denies that he was ever convicted of human trafficking. Here's the clip.
Now, one of the questions that pops up, not one of the most frequently asked questions, but one of the questions that pops up kind of often, am I a convicted human trafficker? No, of course not. That's stupid. I'm a convicted alien smuggler. There is a difference. There is a difference.
Here, Beau is being kind of deceitful. At the time, I guess he was getting this sort of question regularly enough that he figured it was worth trying to get ahead of it. So he tells his audience that he was never charged with human trafficking. That sounds like a good, firm, specific denial, except it doesn't actually mean all that much. No one in his position would ever specifically be charged with human trafficking, per se, because human trafficking is a colloquial catch-all term you could use to describe a whole suite of illegal and immoral activities. It's not a precise legal term or the name of an actual crime a US state prosecutor would be going after anyone for. By shrugging this off, and implying that what he did was merely alien smuggling, as in just helping people enter the US without documents, Beau is trying to make it sound here like he's doing something most progressives would broadly agree isn't immoral. Now, as a far-left anarchist myself, I don't like national borders. If an activist type were involved in helping resettle people, in this case in the US, I would basically consider that a good thing. If you risked immense potential legal consequences to yourself in order to help someone come to a better country in search for a safer life, I'd think that's great. What's really bad, though, is when you facilitate the mass import of foreign nationals into your country just so you can take their money and put them to work in your hotel slavery scheme. I'm not concerned with what Beau did just because it's illegal. I'm concerned about what he did because it's immoral. He has victims. What Beau did was not a radical leftist act of undermining border security. What Beau did was exploitation for his own ends. The only other time he refers to what he did in the video is shortly after the prior clip, where Beau basically just affirms he won't go into further detail willingly, then just literally laughs it off and drops the topic quickly. Here's that clip.
I know there are people that want to know about it. No. No.
Again, for posterity's sake, I'll link the entirety of this old video of his in the description of mine, if you want to fully dive down this rabbit hole yourself. But the point of bringing all this up is, basically, after Beau gets out of his 3.5-year prison term for fraud and harbouring his illegal workers, he pivots to doing this online political commentary that's nowadays become a full-time money-making career for him. As a leftist, I believe in restorative justice. That means I rarely, if ever, think incarceration is the proper way to fix a problem. To that end, if you do get busted for running a slavery ring, then do 3 years for it, I also don't think you've automatically made up for the bad thing you did just because you did some time. So now we're in a position where Beau has been doing these typically thrice daily videos talking about current events through a nominally left-wing lens for a few years now. And even if, hypothetically, everything he was saying was always completely spot on and correct, he still started doing all this right off the back of years of doing something utterly monstrous. And it's not like Beau stopped doing the whole trick people into coming into the country under false pretenses, then take their money and make them work for less than minimum wage thing of his own accord either. If he hadn't been caught, how many more years would it have kept going? How many more young women would he have lured in, then pimped out to his buddies' businesses? Would it have been going to this day if Beau hadn't been stopped? Quite possibly. Even if we give Beau the benefit of the doubt and say he'd profusely denounce that part of his life now, if ever explicitly called out face to face or something, your actions need to match your words. Even if he legitimately felt bad about what he's done, you can't just start doing progressive talking points on the internet for a living and act like you weren't literally enslaving people a few years prior. I personally believe that, theoretically, anyone can rehabilitate themselves politically and make a genuine, heartfelt change for the better. But, as an experienced, real-life progressive political organizer, I wouldn't want someone hanging around leftist circles to so much as help organize a pride parade if I found out that a few years back they were running a forced labor syndicate and hadn't made any meaningful or material efforts to make things right. Now, obviously, in front of his camera, Beau is just a character. Like I said earlier, his real name's Justin King, and his appearance, set, and mannerisms are all a deliberate choice to present himself a particular way. Even his accent's a bit hammed up for the sake of the performance. But I have to ask, how much does the Beau of the Fifth Column persona differ from the man who plays him? Because Beau might do a good job of slickly summarizing a list of lefty talking points every day, but I feel like it's not a reach to assert that someone with actual progressive intentions at heart would never have thought to run a massive, inhumane forced labor operation in the first place. Beau isn't some folksy, backwoods Appalachian redneck guy. He was operating out of the middle of commercial suburban Florida. When the feds finally busted him, they didn't even confiscate all his assets, but they still took more than $1 million worth of cash and property. Let the fact that Beau extorted more than $1 million out of these Eastern European women he was exploiting sink in properly. Furthermore, who, in their mid-20s, even has the sort of capital to start a visa fraud operation big enough to serve a chain of hotels and the condos he's keeping 20 women in each? This guy is just Andrew Tate if he had a beard. If he wants to position himself as a leftist, then leftists should be holding him responsible for what he is. In getting my sources together for this video, the only people I could find properly talking about what Beau did were, unfortunately, as far as I could tell, mostly reactionary cranks. This is very unfortunate. Frankly, us who consider ourselves progressives ought to be the ones holding the people we've given a platform at an audience of hundreds of thousands to some sort of accountability. Time alone doesn't fix something bad someone did. You can't just have done a really bad thing, then just push it to the side for years, ignore it, and act like a bit of distance changes what happened. And in this case, with Beau, just making a load of videos also doesn't fix what he did. Even if you did a lot of something good, like progressive political or community organizing, right after you get busted for doing some human trafficking, that's not restorative justice. And incidentally, making videos isn't even political organizing. Real political organizing is something you do in the real world, not online. Whether it's building communities, getting into physical confrontations with wannabe fascists in the streets, or even stuff like helping publicize demonstrations and distributing food and clothing to people who need it, all organizing is real-world stuff, not just commentary you do for an audience of fans. For someone like Beau to properly own up to the consequences of what he did, really, for starters, he should be much more transparent about the whole massive extortion operation he had going for several years. And in a perfect world, any of his hundreds of victims would see some sort of remuneration or restitution from him. As it stands now, if you're a Beau of the Fifth Column fan or regular viewer of his who's stuck with me so far, I have to thank you for hearing me out. But I just hope that no one who does watch his content, who happens to see this, inadvertently falls into the trap of rushing to his defense by saying it was a long time ago or something. I wasn't ever a dedicated viewer of his myself, but between finding out what he did and how he's purposefully kept it all hush since, I, for one, don't really have an appetite to hear from him again anytime soon. You may or may not feel the same way, and I can't tell you what to think. You may very well feel that, on balance, what Beau did isn't enough to make you not want to watch his stuff or continue supporting him. But I have to say, at time of writing and recording, Beau currently has 4,821 paying supporters on Patreon. He keeps the exact amount of money that makes him decidedly hidden, but we know it's at least 4,821 US dollars a month, since his lowest support tier is $1. And realistically, many of those people will be donating more than that. For one thing, he doesn't need your money. I mean, he's been living a pretty cushy life for several years now, just making short videos with no production overhead. Beau isn't exactly a struggling creator. But even before his YouTube career began, again, he evidently had enough capital to get together a shell business, a bunch of condominiums, and front a load of visas, all before he started exploiting those Eastern European women. There's untold better ways you could be supporting progressive causes than giving Beau your cash. Even if it's just donating to something like a local food drive or the local anarchist library or something. But I think the most important thing to note here is that if you didn't know about the illegal worker racket Beau happily ran until he got busted for it, then definitionally, you weren't able to make an informed decision about whether or not you wanted to support him, whether financially or just with your viewership. Those past activities, and the fact Beau hasn't done anything to make up for them, might leave a really bad taste in your mouth, as it's done in mine. But what's almost as bad is that Beau does not want you to even have the ability to decide whether or not to support someone with his record. He'd rather not have you know. That's absolutely not how we should do things here on the left. People cannot be held accountable, if there's no transparency. Frankly, I don't care if he goes online 3 times a day and says some really good talking points or analysis. He still otherwise acts completely unrepentant about his labour exploitation phase. And that being the case, I don't even necessarily believe that all the left-wing talking points he says to camera are actually what he thinks. It's not no true Scotsman to say that a real far-left anarchist would be a bit more contrite or remorseful about having extorted hundreds of women. They wouldn't try their hardest to cover it up, that's for sure. That's all I had to say today. Please just keep it in mind. By all means, do take a gander at the sources for all claims in this video, which will be in the description. And if you do currently donate to Beau, I'd respectfully urge you to reconsider. Once again, my name's Card. If you might like to hear more from me, feel free to subscribe to this YouTube page, or take a look at my other videos. Either way, goodbye for now, stay safe out there, and have a lovely day.